Fáilte Stock. It's great to be with you talking about a passion of mine, the ballads. You see, I'm 68 years of age now, but for about 50 years, I thought I was a singer. I fancied myself as a singer. Don't anymore. But anyway, I used to go around collecting ballads, and that's how I met Con Graney and Jack Carroll and all those great people around this stone in West Limerick, Jimmy Harbert, Jim Lyons, Karen Trench, all these great people. And one of the ballads that I grew up with was the Valley of Knockanure. And I, little by little, began to hear different versions. And I was fascinated. So it's taken me the bones of 50 years to put this little book together. It's called Rhyming History, the Irish War of Independence and the Ballads of Atrocity in the Valley of Knockanure. Now, what I've done is I've written a short history of the period 1919 or 90, the period, April 1921 to May 1921, when these atrocities took place in Knockanure in the parish of Moyvan near Listowel. And I found the bones of a dozen ballads, some widely differing. Now, we all know that ballads, as they go from place to place and country to country and language to language, change. I'll give you an instance. Many of you will remember in the 70s a song, "Where have you been all day, Henry, my son? Where have you been all day, my beloved one?" Well, that's a modern version of a child ballad called Lord Randall. And Seamus Ennis very famously collected it Osgailge in the Aran Islands, Caref Tor Fagan Way. Now, this has happened to the Valley of Knockanure as well. It becomes wildly different, fancifully different, and this is what I hope to point out in this talk tonight. So I'll start. Now, we'll have a couple of songs tonight to entertain you and to illustrate the lecture, so it won't be all me pontificating. Now, I'm going to begin with a quote from Andrew Fletcher of Saltoun, who lived between 1653 and 1716. He was a Scottish patriot. He says, "If a man were permitted to make all the ballads, he need not care who should make the laws of a nation." According to this reading, we are as influenced by the poetry of a nation as we are by its history, and more so than by its laws. In this light, let us consider the ballads of the event of Thursday, May the 12th, 1921, at Gortadana in Knockanure, County Kerry. The months of April and May 1921 saw a lot of bloodshed in what is now the parish of Moyvan Knockanure, near Listowel in North Kerry. This was, of course, during the Irish War of Independence. On Thursday, April the 7th, Mick Galvin, an IRA volunteer, was killed by British forces during an ambush at Kilmorna in Knockanure. The IRA had been lying in wait to ambush a group of British soldiers who were cycling after a visit to Kilmorna House, Sir Arthur Vickers' residence. Vickers had been Ulster King of Arms and custodian of the Irish Crown jewels, which were kept in Dublin Castle, the burglary of which in 1907, though Vickers was never seriously suspected of being involved in their theft, led to his ruin and ultimately to his death. Found guilty of negligence and dismissed from his post, ruined socially and financially with neither position nor pension, Vickers, at the invitation of his half-brother, George Mahoney, came to live in Kilmorna House. When George died in 1912, he left the estate to Sir Arthur's sister, Edith, who lived in London. She decided that Sir Arthur could live out his life in Kilmorna, that he remained there during the War of Independence, when British forces and Sinn Féin activists were matching atrocities, was foolhardy rather than courageous, and typical of the man who was generally regarded by the local people as a decent, if eccentric gentleman. But he was also passing information on IRA activity to Dublin Castle. Now, I have it on the word of several people from Knockanure whose grandparents remembered Sir Arthur Vickers as being a very kind man who used to give toys to the children around Kilmorna Estate at Christmas, this kind of stuff. On Thursday, April the 14th, 1921, Kilmorna House was raided by the local IRA, obviously in reprisal. One of the raiding party, Lard Brother, told the steward, Michael Murphy, that they had come to burn the house, which they proceeded to do. However, 3 members of the flying column led Vickers to the end of the garden and shot him. Tradition has it that they were Jack Sheehan, Paddy Dean, and Jack Breheny. And one of the executioners, Jack Sheehan, was himself shot dead by the British Army in Moonveenloch Bog, at a range of 600 yards near Knockanure, Moonveenloch Bog, on May the 26th. Then, on May the 12th, Crown forces shot dead 3 members of the flying column at Gaeltacht in Knockanure, a short distance from Kilmorna. This is the incident that is commemorated in the various ballads that follow. Poetry, particularly narrative poetry, to which the ballad belongs, distorts historical fact for aesthetic reasons. These may be for the imperatives of narrative, for considerations of rhyme or metre, or for reasons of the poet's perceptions or sympathies. The ballads of the atrocity in Knockanure on May the 12th, 1921 are no different. Only one, the most recent version, composed in 2005, gives the whole story. Most versions tell the basic story, but some, either from carelessness or ignorance or from unrestrained fancy, depart from historical fact entirely. The most famous ballad of the events is Bryan MacMahon's The Valley of Knockanure, written in 1946. Though in the true spirit of tradition, its authorship is disputed. I might also point to Sigismund Clifford's The Boys of Barna Shroida. That's disputed below on Carsavine. Now, let's clear this up immediately. On August the 16th, 1969, Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin, a Republican and retired principal teacher of Knockanure National School, wrote the following testimony, and I quote, I, Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin, formerly Príomh Ida of Knockanure National School, County Kerry, hereby affirm that about 20 years ago, I brought to Mr. Bryan MacMahon, NT, Astreet Listowel, a few verses of a traditional ballad on the murdering at Gaeltacht, County Kerry, on May 1921, of 3 soldiers of the Irish Republican Army, Jeremiah Lyons, Patrick Dalton, and Patrick Welsh. I also supplied Bryan MacMahon with a copy of the sworn statement of Condy, the survivor, and requested him to rewrite the ballad and to add whatever verses were necessary so that it would be historically accurate. This Bryan MacMahon did, and later supplied me with printed copies of the ballad in question, The Valley of Knockanure, a copy of which is affixed herewith. Signed, Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin, date the 16th of the 8th, 1969, witness Ashteen Ó Ceallacháin. Now, I want to say further that Bryan remembered himself in the magazine Thrower, which is the organ of Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éireann, in 1971, in an article called Ballad Collecting Memories, he said the following: perhaps the most successful of all my ballads was The Valley of Knockanure, recalling the executions in 1921, which I wrote on an incomplete and erroneous older ballad at the request of my good friend, the late Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin, NT Knockanure. Pádraig supplied me with a sworn statement of the sole survivor of Knockanure, the late Condy, and asked me to rewrite the older version and make it historically accurate. Now, Bryan's version will be sung for us by Karen Trench, a great Comhaltas woman, a great traditional singer, a great carrier of our flame and our tradition and our heritage, a teacher like many of those great people. Karen Trench, will you sing The Valley of Knockanure for us, please?
Right, thank you, Gabriel. You may sing and speak about Easter week or the heroes of '98, of the Fenian men who roamed the glen in victory or defeat. Their names are placed on history's page, their memory will endure. Not a song is sung for our darling sons in the Valley of Knockanure. Our hero boys, they were bold and true, no counsel would they take. Their rambled to a lonely spot where the black and tan
Leave it alone, it's fine. that's in their side.
Sweet, the summer breezes played, but 'twas not long till lions came on, saying, "Time's not mine nor your." But alas, 'twas late, and they met their fate in the Valley of Knockanure. They took them then beside a fence to where the firs did bloom. Like brothers slow, they faced the foe for to meet their dreadful doom. When Dalton spoke, his voice it broke with a passion proud and pure. For our land we die as we face the sky in the Valley of Knockanure. 'Twas on a neighbouring hillside we listened in calm dismay. In every house, in every town, a maiden knelt to pray. They're closing in around them now with rifle fire so sure. And Dalton's dead and Lyons is down in the Valley of Knockanure. But ere the guns could seal his fate, Condé had broken through. With a prayer to God he spurned the sod, and against the hill he flew. The bullets tore his flesh in two, yet he cried with passion pure. For my comrade's death revenge I'll get in the Valley of Knockanure. There they lay on the hillside clay for the love of Ireland's cause, where the cowardly clan of the Black and Tan had showed them England's laws. No more they'll feel the soft wind steal o'er uplands fair and sure. For side by side our heroes died in the Valley of Knockanure. I met with Dalton's mother, and she to me did say, "May God have mercy on his soul, who fell in the glen today." Could I but kiss his cold, cold lips, my aching heart 'twould cure, and I'd gladly lay him down to rest in the Valley of Knockanure. The golden sun is setting now behind the Phelan Lee. The pale, pale moon is rising far out beyond Tralee. The dismal stars and clouds afar are darkened o'er the moor, and the banshee cried where our heroes died in the Valley of Knockanure. O Walsh and Lyons and Dalton brave, although your hearts are clay, yet in your stead we have true men yet to guard the gap today. While grass is found on Ireland's ground, your memory will endure. So God guard and keep the place you sleep and the Valley of Knockanure.
Gabriel, you might unmute yourself there. I had to mute you while Karen was singing because we lost the sound a little bit.
Can you hear me now? I'm okay? Lovely. Well, thank you, Karen, for the beautiful rendition of Bryan MacMahon's The Valley of Knockanure. It's clear from the words that we now sing, from the way Karen sang them, whatever about their ancestry, are Bryan MacMahon's. And if you would like a chance to hear her singing again, it's on the CD that goes with the book. This is the plug, there's a CD going with the book, and Karen is singing on it, along with Christy Goulding of Knockanure and Jim Lyons of Barangary and Knockalucka, and Jimmy Harbert from Ate is singing it over the ballad about Paddy Dalton, who of course came from Ate. You can hear her tomorrow as well, of course. She's at the signing tomorrow from 2 to 4 in the Shanachie of the Kerry Writers Centre in the Stole. We're launching the book at a signing, and please, if you're coming, social distance and masks and all the rest, but you're very welcome to come. Anyway, let us now compare this, the best version, with the actual history of the given event, given firsthand by Condé, the survivor of the atrocity. Sworn statement on the incidents at Gaeltacht made by Condé before Thomas R. Hill, J.P. Tarbert in June 1921. Remember, Knockanure, the atrocity took place on the 12th of May. This is June 1921. And he says, about 9:30 on Thursday, May the 12th, 1921, I, Cornelius D., accompanied by Patrick Dalton and Pádraig Welsh, who was Dee's first cousin, left Athay unarmed, where we had been attending a mission given by the Redemptorist Fathers. We were walking along the road leading to the Stole when at Gaeltacht Bridge we met Jerry Lyons. He was cycling. He dismounted and began talking about various happenings. After a few minutes, Paddy Welsh suggested that we should go into a field as it would be safer than the roadside. We moved and were just inside the fence when we heard the noise of a lorry. Take cover, lads, I advised, and we tried to conceal ourselves as best we could. Jerry Lyons, Paddy Dalton, and I took cover immediately. Paddy Welsh ran to the end of the field and lay down. Very soon we were surrounded by men in the uniforms of the Royal Irish Constabulary. We're done, Connie, said Paddy Dalton. Come out, lads, I said, with our hands up. Jerry Lyons, Paddy Dalton, and myself stood with our hands over our heads. Paddy Welsh ran towards us. We were met with a torrent of foul language and abuse. I remember such expressions as, ye murderers, ye bastards. We have got the real route. We have got the flying column. We were asked our names and given correctly. We were searched and found unarmed, having nothing but a copy of the Irish Independent. We were then compelled to undress, and while we were fastening our clothes again, we were beaten with rifles, struck with revolvers, and thrown on the ground and kicked in trying to save ourselves. Then we were separated some distance from each other. 4 or 5 men came round us, each of us, and my captors continued to beat me with their rifles and hit me with their fists. After about 20 minutes, we were marched towards the road and then into the lorries. Paddy Welsh and Paddy Dalton were put in the first lorry, I was put in the second, and Jerry Lyons in the third. The lorries were driven for about a half a mile towards Athay. They were then stopped and turned around. I'll depart from the script there for a minute. It's often asked, why did the lorries turn around? Very simply, the road was trenched by the IRA. They dug a trench across the road to prevent the easy passage of armoured cars and cross-sea tenders and stuff. Then they stopped and turned round. Paddy Welsh and Paddy Dalton were changed to the lorry in which I was. Jerry Lyons was not changed out of the last lorry, which was now leading. The lorries were then driven back the same road for about a mile. We were then ordered out of them. I looked at my companions. I saw blood on Jerry Lyons' face and on Paddy Walsh's mouth. Paddy Dalton was bleeding from the nose. We were then asked to run, but we refused. We were again beaten with the rifles and ordered into a field by the roadside. We refused, but were forced into a field. We asked for the trial, but the Black and Tans laughed and jeered and called us murderers. We were put standing in line facing a fence about 40 yards from the road. I was placed first on the right, Jerry Lyons was next, Paddy Dalton next, and Paddy Welsh on the left. Then a Black and Tan with a rifle resting on the fence was put in front of each of us, about 5 yards distant. There were about 10 more Black and Tans standing behind them. I looked straight into the face of the man in front of me. He delayed about 20 seconds as if he would like one of his companions to fire first. The second Black and Tan fired. Jerry Lyons flung up his arms, moaned and fell backwards. I glanced at him and noticed blood coming on his waistcoat. I turned and ran. I was gone about 12 yards when I got wounded in the right thigh. My leg bent under me, but I held on running although I had to limp. I felt that I was being chased, and I heard bullets whizzing past me. One of the lorries was driven along the road in my front, and fire was maintained from it. After I had run about a mile and a half, I threw away my coat, collar, tie, and puttees. The Tans continued to follow me for fully 3 miles. When too exhausted to run further, I flung myself into a drain in an oats garden. I was there for about 45 minutes when 2 men came along. They assisted me to walk for about 40 yards. I was limping so much that one of them had to send for a car, and I was taken to a house. I recognized Head Constable Smith Listowel, along with the Black and Tans present at the massacre, also Constable Raymond, and there was one in the uniform of a district inspector of the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, one of the things I want to say here, I don't know how true it is, but there is a tradition among people that I know who talk about this, and I have it from Hugh Goulding of Knockanure, North American, and he died recently. He said the Black and Tans, they were paid on Thursday, and they were always drunk. So that might account for the fact that they weren't shooting too straight. I don't know. The official report on May the 14th, 1921 from Dublin Castle Publicity Department reads as follows. 3 RIC tenders were ambushed by about 100 armed men at Kilmore near Listowel at 1:15 p.m. on Thursday, May the 12th. 2 RIC were slightly wounded. The dead bodies of 3 unknown rebels were found at the scene of the ambush, and it is believed that they suffered heavy casualties. Crown forces also captured a number of shotguns, revolvers, and ammunition. Years later, in 1958, Condy was to revisit the tragedy in an article he wrote in the Shannonside Annual. In it, he tells us that due to an outbreak of scabies, which was called IRAH, among members of the North Kerry flying column, in early May 1921, it was decided to disperse the flying columns in groups of 3 or 4 to get medical treatment. Paddy Welsh, Paddy Dalton, and Condy consisted of one group. Paddy Welsh insisted that the 3 go to his home in Gunsborough in the parish of Ballydonohoe, the hub of IRA activity in North Kerry, according to Condy. This they did. Shortly afterwards, Dee writes in the article, and I quote, A volunteer by the name of Buckley from Listowel came to Welsh with a dispatch, which stated that a conversation of a certain woman in the store with the police was overheard by a barmaid. The woman told the police that a mission was being held in Athay and that it was more than likely that the West Limerick column would be attending devotions there. She also said she would get all the information she could from a friend of hers who had a religious goods stand at the mission. When I relayed the message to the others, we decided that under no circumstances would we let the West Limerick column be trapped. We agreed that Paddy Dalton, who was from Athay, and I should proceed at once to Athay. Dalton and I decided we'd make faster time if we travelled without arms. We felt time was of the utmost importance to forewarn our comrades. We travelled by way of Tullamore, Knockanure, along the Gale River to Kilbaha, where we stopped at Hanrahan's and had some refreshments. We continued along the river as far as possible and then cut across and arrived in Athay at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We visited our good friend Josie Liston and told her our mission. She immediately got in touch with the West Limerick column and local volunteers. That evening, we contacted the local mailman and made arrangements to meet him the next morning to censor the mail. Dee and Dalton went to the devotions in Athay, for at no time at all, Dee continues, did any of the fighting men miss an opportunity to attend church if at all possible. After devotions, Patrick, Dalton and I visited the fathers who were staying in Danaher's Hotel. We told them also of our mission. They became angry to think that such a thing could happen and wanted to have the woman put out of the village straight away. But we objected as we figured we might get some information from the mails. We attended devotions for 3 nights and visited the priest until 11 o'clock each night. Paddy Dalton's home was about a mile from the village, and each night we went there. I remember well the first night we were going home. When we were a short distance from the house, Paddy remarked that the family was still up. I asked him how he knew. He remarked that they were looking at the cattle. Again I asked, how do you know? He replied, don't you see the lights in and out of the cowhouse? I did not see the light. When we got into the house, we went to his father's room and asked him if he had been out. His father replied, no. He then went to the other rooms and asked his brothers. He received the same answer, no. The next morning we got up early, and while at breakfast started to discuss the lights of the night before, no one paid much attention to it but Paddy himself. The routine was the same the next night. We went to devotions, visited the priests, and started for home about the same time. Same thing happened. Paddy again saw the lights, but I did not. He again questioned his people, but again they replied that they had not seen a light, and they hadn't been out with a light. He wasn't satisfied till he went out and looked all over. We could see nothing or hear nothing and went to bed. The next day we were joined by Patrick Welsh in the village. We again attended the mission, went to confession, visited the priest, and left for Paddy's home. Again, when approaching the house, Paddy Dalton and Paddy Welsh both saw the lights. I didn't see them. When the family was again questioned, they replied the same as the 2 previous nights. This time the 2 Patricks went out and searched but found nothing. The next morning the lights were again discussed. It passed off as a joke. This was Thursday, the 12th of May, the day they were shot. The 2 men who saw the lights were shot. Now let us consider some other ballads of the atrocity. Christy Goulding, born in Knockanure in 1935, sings a version which he learned from Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin in Knockanure National School in the early 1940s. Historically accurate, it is essentially a shorter version of Bryan MacMahon's ballad, and that's on the CD that goes with the book. J. Anthony Gahan, the great historian, in his book Listowel and its Vicinity, Mercier Press, Cork 1973, second and revised edition 1974, prints Bryan MacMahon's ballad almost verbatim, but amidst verses 2, our hero boys were bold and true, and 8, there they lay on the hillside clay. He changes the line, and side by side they bravely died in the Valley of Knockanure, to and side by side they fought and died in the Valley of Knockanure. They didn't fight. The Clancy, and that's the way it's mostly sung nowadays, actually, is that side by side they fought and died. The Clancy Brothers and Tommy Makeham's songbook, Tip Arm Music Publishers Incorporated, New York, 1964, prints a much truncated, though essentially Bryan MacMahon's version of the Valley of Knockanure. Historical inaccuracies creep in. They ramble to a lonely spot where the black and tans did hide. The Tans didn't hide. They happened upon the Gutadana martyrs. As in God's version above, they carried the line, and side by side they fought and died in the Valley of Knockanure. They didn't fight. They were captured unarmed. But ere the guns could see his fate, young Welsh had broken through. It was Dee who escaped. And the summer sun is sinking low behind the field and lea. That's Field and Lea. It should be the field and lea, two local rivers. This displays an ignorance of local history and geography, understandably the mutating nature of folk ballad, but historically inexcusable. Another version of Bryan MacMahon's ballad was recorded by Paddy Drury, the renowned Irish traditional singer, on his Ireland Tyrone LP from Topic Records in London in 1966. And it is published in a book called Irish Writing in the 20th Century, a Reader, edited by David Pearce from Cork University Press in 2000. In it, in the opinion of Pearce, and he says, it is one of the best songs composed about the Irish War of Independence in 1919 to 21. Listen to Paddy Drury singing this on Topic Records, and you can hear the heartbeat that accompanied Ireland in its transition from colonial rule to independence. It is once again factually inaccurate. It states once again that side by side they fought and died in the Valley of Knockanure, that the event took place upon an autumn evening. It didn't. It was the morning of May the 12th. That they were waiting upon a brief dispatch to come from Town. They were not. But later on, in Tim Leahy's ballad below, I'll be talking about it. Then he says, he sings, as Dinny spoke, his voice it broke. There was no Dinny present that day. That the glistening stars shone out afar and gleamed o'er Collinsmore. There is no such place in Knockanure. And that the Daltons fell in the fight. There was no fight. Lastly, it makes no mention of Condee's escape. Now, there's a tradition in around the parish of Athay that the original version of the Valley of Knockanure was written by James Kiley Mahoney from Knocknabowl, Athay. This tradition has been conveyed to me by Donny Lyons, an All-Ireland senior singing champion from Glen, a neighbouring parish in West Limerick, Donald de Barra of Athay, singer, musician, and former president of Comhaltas Ceoltóirí Éireann, and Dan Keane of Knockanure, a poet, an All-Ireland senior champion of newly composed ballads at Fleadh na hÉireann, all people of unimpeachable integrity. No one now seems to know what Kiley Mahoney wrote. It is possible that he wrote an early version now lost. It's even possible that that's the version that Bryan MacMahon had, as he said in his article in Thrower. Dan Keane states in his book Around That Thay, which he wrote in 2005, that a Mrs. Hartnett of Abbeyfield, a daughter of Kiley Mahoney, confirmed to him that her father wrote the Valley of Knockanure, that she remembered him writing the line, I was speaking to Dalton's mother. Be that as it may, there is no doubting Bryan MacMahon's authorship of the ballad as attested in Pádraig Ó Ceallacháin's testimony. On July the 7th, 1947, the 19 years old John B Keane, who would come to national prominence when his play Sai was first staged in 1959, wrote a tribute to the men who died at Gutadana, and here it is. He calls it Gutadana, and he subtitles it To the Men Who Were Killed There. The bitter complaint of the westering wind has borrowed a song from the sea, tireless and aegis and lingering long in its hollow monotony. In it the voices come back from the past of the men who fought for tomorrow, of the men who were ever men over men, it sang, and who died for the fools that followed. A sentinel stands with a silver sword at the golden gate of sleep, and watches the souls of his brotherhood through their shimmering stardoms peep. Lowly he buries his head from waiting, and moans of the piercing sorrow, waiting the while for the few who come, who died for the great tomorrow. The Spalpeen poet Paddy Drury, 1865 to 1945, a native of Knockanure, wrote a number of ballads about the atrocity. Here is one. It's called The Glen of Knockanure. May the Lord have mercy on their souls. Their hearts were loyal and true. They were beat and shot in a lonely spot in a glen near Knockanure. There was Jerry Lyons now from the Wall. There was Dalton from Athay. There was Welt from Ballydonoghue and Condee who ran away. Through hill and vale he did leg bail as the bullets pierced the ground. He jumped the stream at the bog lane, where he blinked the devil's hounds. Through the mountain side he did tide, though wounded then and sore, and he shed a tear for his comrades dear, who were bleeding in their gore. For our martyrs bold, now dead and cold, to the lorries were thrown in, and Smith said there was an ambush at the gut of Glen. For now Sinn Féin proved that you'll gain, and remembered those who died, and that each man tried to keep his eye on Smith and on MacBride. Now we have two more we sad deplore, that in this parish fell, they are Gallivan and Sheehan, in heaven they all dwell. Smith and MacBride were two of the black and tans I see, who were present at Gortadana that day. Now, very famous man, Ted Gordon of Dewa, great songwriter, lived from 1868 to 1927. He's the author of a song called The Dawning of the Day, which has also been claimed for Paddy Drury. But I suppose it's only fair to say that Ted's claim to it is a superior one. Jeremiah Histon in the Shannonside Annual of 1957 claimed it for Paddy Drury, but I think if you look at the style and all the rest, it's closer to Gordon's. So Jim Lyons is the man who sings it on the CD in the book, and he'll be singing it tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the launch in the stall. But I'd have a go at singing it now. Remember, I warned you that I thought I was a singer one time, but I'm not. The Dawning of the Day. O holy island, suffering still, your troubles now are great. From tyrants trained to shoot and kill, whose minds are filled with hate, who sold their souls for foreign gold, to rob and steal away. It's no wonder that our hearts are sad at the dawning of the day. Sons of North Kerry, proud and true, step forward every man. You know the foreign bloodhound crew, the murderers black and tan, who shot young Lyons and Dalton, and Walsh the proud and gay, as they left their gallant comrades at the dawning of the day. On Gaeltacht's rugged height, surrounded by the crew, how could they stand, how could they fight, what could our martyrs do? They showed no fear when death was near, when the tigers sought their prey. But our blood ran cold when the tale was told at the dawning of the day. But Kerry men are fighting still from Dingle to Lixna. I'm proud to be a Kerry man, and I'm proud of sweet Dewa. I'm proud of Lyons, that noble lad, who gave his life away, as he left his gallant comrades at the dawning of the day. When writing down the roll of fame in Ireland's history, with green and gold illume the name of gallant brave Condé, I'd give my life to clasp his hand, and 'tis with him I would stay, and fight by his side for my native land at the dawning of the day. O Mother Ireland, dry your tears, be ever full of cheer. Pray for those noble volunteers who fought to set you free. When freedom comes to Ireland's sons, De Valera he will say, lay down your guns, the fight is won, it's the dawning of the day. That's the version that I learned from Jack Carroll in the stall in a pub in Market Street during the mat one day in the stall about 1978. God be with Jack Carroll. Now, Tim Leahy of Mount Rivers, Listowel, also made a ballad. His version, composed on September the 20th, 1921, The first one that I know that I can authenticate, the murders took place on the 12th of May. This is composed on September the 20th. That's very close to being the first one. It's printed in Conor Laughlin's More Irish Street Ballads, first published in 1965 by Three Candles Press Limited, Dublin, and subsequently in 1978 by Pan Books, London. This is a faithful version of the events at Gaeltacht. What it lacks in drama and personality, it makes up for in local detail. For instance, he tells us that the boys were coming from Mass that morning, that they were waiting for a dispatch. There is no evidence of this in Condee's testimony, nor is it mentioned by Danny MacMahon, who was working close to his home in Gaeltacht on that day, in his account of their capture, published in The Soul in its Vicinity by J. Anthony Gahan. As in Christy Goulding's version, Lee tells us that they were shot near an ancient ring fort. It's actually called Lisrow, and there are many ring forts in Knockanure, but he was shot near Lisrow, which incidentally is still to be seen in front of the ditch where they were shot, and where now stands the monument erected to their memory by the North Kerry Republican Soldiers Memorial Committee in 1949. And it's interesting that it is still the North Kerry Republican Soldiers Memorial Committee that are still, to this day, maintaining those monuments. And they have done Goshka for the Centenary. The monuments in Knockanure are beautifully restored. The most recently composed version of the events was written by Dan Keane of Knockanure, 1919 to 2012, and was published in the Ballydonohoe Parish magazine 2005. Historically accurate, it is the most complete version of the events of May the 12th, 1921. And now to the version where history and poetry part company entirely. The version recorded by Joe Heaney, Joseph O'Haney, by Ewan McCall and Peggy Seeger in their home in Beckenham in Kent, England in 1964. Joe Heaney, many of you will know, was probably the greatest sean-nós singer, Connemara, probably the greatest sean-nós singer of the 20th century, eventually made his life in the universities of America talking about ballads and sean-nós. Joe, by way of giving background information, has the following to say. Listen to this. You know, in Ireland, every 6 months, the priest comes around to give advice and confessions to the old people you see in the cottages. And there's one particular house they come to every time. Well, this day they came to Knockanure in County Kerry, and it was in 1922. And there were two wee lads, Eamon Dalton and Danny Welsh was on the run up in the hills, and 5 lorry loads of black and tans came to hunt them. And they had a boy, a 14-year-old boy called Condé, bringing them messages to tell them how the tans was behaving. And the tans, 50 tans, 100 tans I should say, surrounded them with rifles, and they told Condé to get away somewhere and bring a message to the village that they were willing to die to save the village. And the two fellas died, but the people, the old people coming as they do there, they come along, old women and men, and to spare them, the two lads fought to the death with 100 black and tans up on the hill and saved the village from ruin. Because if they ran back to the village, the lads were afraid the tans would come back and probably kill innocent people. It's a very long ballad, so I won't give you the full ballad, but I'll give you 3 verses of it. But I'll give you the first verse just to show you that it's basically Bryan MacMahon's version too, that has been twisted totally out of recognition. And it starts, you may boast and speak about Easter week, of the heroes of 98, of the gallant men who roamed the glen to victory or defeat. The men who died on the scaffold high were outlined on the moor. Not a word was spoken of 2 young lads in the Valley of Knockanure. It was on a summer's evening those 2 young lads sat down. They were waiting on a brief dispatch to come from Treddy town. It wasn't long till lines came on saying, time's not mine nor yours. Look out, we are surrounded in the Valley of Knockanure. And listen to this. Young Dalton grabbed a rifle and by Walsh's side he stood. He gazed across the valley and over toward the hill. In the glen where armed men with rifles fired galore, they were Dalton, Dan and the black and tans in the Valley of Knockanure. One shot from Dalton's rifle sent a machine gun out of play. He turned to young Lyons and said, now try and get away. Keep wide of rocks, keep close to nooks, and cross by Freeney's moor, and Danny and Di will fight and die in the Valley of Knockanure. Heaney's version goes on for another 6 verses, which I will not bother you with. This is more to do with Hollywood than history, and calls into question the great singer's authority in matters historical. It calls into question, too, the historical authority of folk song. Basically, as we all know, song is not history. Nonetheless, Joe Heaney's version demonstrates how history becomes legend, and we need legend. Though historically inaccurate, legends are true to the spirit of their people, that indefinable coming together of historical fact, memory, story, song, and poetry that make us what we are. And I've collected all those ballads and that lore and that history in this book, Rhyming History, which is being, as I said, launched tomorrow. It can be got in the local bookshops, and it can also be got from the website of the Kerry Writers Centre. But the reason I put it together, apart from my own fascination with the ballad, with all ballads, but particularly with the changing nature of this ballad, is that I found when I was teaching for 35 years in the parish of my Valley of Knockanure, the youngsters didn't know the story. Anybody, I'm 68, as I said, anybody under my age didn't seem to know the story. So I want to reclaim and recover that story for posterity, for musicologists, for singers, for historians, but principally for the people of my Van and Knockanure. This is my homage to the people of my Van and Knockanure, rhyming history, the Irish War of Independence, and the ballads of atrocity in the Valley of Knockanure. Goramil Mahagith.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Excellent. As always, as always. Now,